أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم وبه نستعين صلى الله عليك يا سيدي يا مولاي يا رسول الله وعلى أهل بيتك المظلومين صلى الله عليك يا سيدي يا مولاي وابن مولاي يا أبا عبد الله يا رحمة الله الواسعة ويا باب نجاة الأمة يا غريب يا مظلوم يا أتشان كربلاء ما خاب من تمسك بكم والأمن من لجأ إليكم سادتي يا ليتنا كنا معكم فنفوز والله فوزا عظيما قال الله العظيم في محكم كتابه الكريم والقول كالحق والأصدق القائلين أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم فإن مع العسر يسرا إن مع العسر يسرا آمنا بالله صدق الله العلي العظيم وصلى اللهم على سيدنا محمد وآله الطيبين الطاهرين. We live in really strange and unique times. And in the midst of the last several months, for instance, many people have drawn themselves to certain conclusions about these days being the end of times. In fact, if you take a look from the very onset and the beginning of the year 2020, on social media and on blog posts, individuals are dedicating themselves toward demonstrating unique proofs that we are absolutely and most certainly in the end of times. And if you just rewind a little bit, probably to 2016, around the presidential election in this country, you'll find that many people might have jumped to very similar conclusions. And maybe if you rewind to 1991 during the Gulf War, you would find that individuals would make other very similar predictions. In fact, whenever anything happens in the Middle East, in Iran, in Saudi Arabia, in Yemen, in Syria, in Lebanon, individuals immediately jump to the conclusion that we are in the end of times. Movies, books, literature is dedicated toward this genre of entertainment, seemingly because for whatever reason, individuals are often drawn to this attachment or to this fascination about what is going to happen at the end of times. When this COVID-19 pandemic began, everyone thought that it was not going to be nearly as serious as it's been. And when it began to reach the peak of that which it has reached during end of March or early April, at least here in New York City, again, individuals began to state that this is definitely the cause of the end of the world. And during plagues that have preceded this one in decades and centuries before, there's also been this narrative. When you take a look across Islamic history in and of itself, like I mentioned before, there have been unique turning points and climaxes within Islamic history in which individuals believe that absolutely without doubt this year is going to be the end of times. There was even a group of people in the early period within Islamic history who believed that without a doubt, after the tragedy of Imam Hussain alayhi salatu wasalam, the world would no longer continue. But today we are here 1400 years after the tragedy of Hussain alayhi salam in Karbala. You see that we are very much still alive, and we are very much not in the end of times. And if you fast forward a little while later, you'll find also within early Islamic history, there were these thoughts during the time of Imam Hussain Jaffer al-Kadhim alayhi salam, after his martyrdom. And if you fast forward even a little while later, that during the time of the Ghaibat al-Sughra, the early or the smaller or the lesser occultation of Imam al-Mahdi during the course of those 69 or 70 years, there was a belief that the Imam alayhi salam was going to return immediately after that and establish a system of justice and purity and equity within the world. and then soon thereafter was going to be the end of times. Why is it that so many of us are attracted to this fascination around tomorrow or today or yesterday being the end of times? And furthermore, what does Islamic tradition say about this idea of stipulating time to demonstrate that these days are the end of times or the days of the return of the Mahdi, Ajalallahu ta'ala faraja, and so on and so forth? And why is it that so many of us, when we take a look at the socio-political circumstances that we're living in, we often are drawn toward a sense or a cycle or an emotion of disappointment, whereby we always believe that things are going to get worse as opposed to actually getting better? You take a look at civilization, you take a look at the history of the world, and you see, as much as we are in the midst of racism and destruction and violence, unfortunately, that for many of us, life is a lot more privileged than it was for our parents, for our grandparents, for our great-grandparents, for our great-great-grandparents, or even if we were to rewind 100 years or 200 years or 500 years, that though it's happening a lot slower than many of us like, this idea of human rights is starting to sort of progress, that individuals who have made unique advancements in technology, whereby we could have never imagined 100 years ago that we would be streaming a live majlis, that I'm sitting in my apartment in New York City, and there are people on the opposite side of the world watching it live, seeing my face, hearing my words in real time. You see that technology, life, civilization, culture, all of these things have developed. One of those things that for whatever reason has not developed is getting over, again, our fascination about the end of times. And for our conversation, inshaAllah ta'ala, this evening, second night of Muharram, I thought to reflect upon this particular notion in three different dimensions. Firstly, in terms of how we should go ahead and approach societal challenges. What do we do with all of the terrible things that are happening in the world? What is our emotion? What is our responsibility to it? Secondly, how do we read signs of the end of times? Those that are mentioned within the books of hadith, for instance. Numerous ahadith of the Prophet and Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salatu wasalam talk about the signs of the end of times. How is it that we deal with them? And the third dimension is in terms of understanding our responsibilities today, in spite of us having a sense of knowledge of the signs of the hour, so to say. So again, in order to recap dimension number one, in terms of how we live through societal challenges. Number two, how we should be reading signs of the end of times. And thirdly, our responsibilities in terms of paving the way for a world and a life that's filled with equity and justice under the command of our Imam al-Mahdi, Ajalallahu ta'ala farajah. So let's get into the first part of our discussion in regards to how we should live through the difficulties and the societal challenges that we face today. Right here in this country, we know that we are witness to systemic racism and police brutality that has been once again spoken about and highlighted by mainstream media, but we know it's not something new. We're living in the midst of a pandemic where we have lost more than 30,000 lives in this very own city of ours. That many of us have lost family members or members of our community, and we've been impacted directly due to this pandemic of the coronavirus. Furthermore, we see tragedy taking place in famine in Yemen, in Lebanon more recently. We are consistently reminded of 5+ million orphans in Iraq. That we see the violence and the injustice and the oppression that we're seeing everywhere across the world, and even within the midst of our own homes and within our own households. And a lot of people, when they see and when they're exposed to everything that they are in regards to the really terrible, awful things that they're witness to, we often jump to the conclusion and assume that not only it's the end of times, but that life just is really terrible. That there's no way out in the midst of this darkness that is surrounding us and that is truly drowning us. When you take a look at the Islamic tradition, we're not told or we're not advised toward living a life whereby we are so pessimistic due to all of the hardships that we are enduring and that we are encountering. Let me give you an example. When Musa alayhi salam lives in the company of the Pharaoh, Fir'aun, and Fir'aun claims to be God himself, establishing a system of systemic injustice that plagues the world during that time, that Musa alayhi salam say, well, life's pretty terrible, let me just not do anything about it? Or did Musa alayhi salam stand with courage and bravery and go out and have the hope that he was going to be able to change the way that things were in his community, or no? When you come and take a look at the Messenger of God, sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wasallam, he would enter into the gathering and enter into the company of people within his community and within his society, and the people of Ta'if, for instance, who would order their children to go and take rocks and throw it at the blessed face of the Messenger of God, sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. Did the Prophet alayhi salam resort back to home, weep, cry, and say, there's no way that I can get out of this misery? No, he didn't live that way. When Imam Hussain alayhi salam arrives in Karbala on the 2nd of Muharram, and he stands in front of 30,000 members ready to shed his blood, did Imam Hussain alayhi salam back down and say, I can't do this, I'm going to give up? No. When someone is in the midst of darkness and in the midst of challenges, our religion teaches us that that's the moment when you need to stand up and be the difference maker that the world needs. As much as everything is really terrible seemingly in the world, where is the light that I can shine in the midst of all of the darkness around? And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala refers to this notion and this idea and this practice and this style of living in reality within the whole Quran. He states, for instance, in the verses that I began with in Surah Al-Inshirah, فَإِنَّمَا الْأُسْرِ يُسْرًا إِنَّمَا الْأُسْرِ يُسْرًا. Surely with every difficulty there is ease. Surely with every difficulty there is ease. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions it 2 times within this particular chapter of the whole Quran. That we're living in a time of difficulty, but along with difficulty, there's a layer of ease that's behind it. That when we go through difficulties and challenges and we are diligent in the midst of the process of getting to the ultimate objective and end goal of that which we're seeking, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will facilitate some sort of unique blessing in some way out. وَمَن يَتَّقِ اللَّهَ يَجْعَل لَهُ مَخْرَجًا. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala states in the Holy Quran, and for those who are God conscious, God will give them a way out. He will give them the solution to all of their problems. Similarly, in another verse, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala states, وَلَلْآخِرَةُ خَيْرٌ لَكَ مِنَ الْعُولَى. That know, O Messenger of God, that the latter part is going to be a lot better than the first. How do we understand this particular verse? That when the Messenger of God sallallahu alayhi wa sallam was preaching in the early days of Mecca, he was neglected and he was rejected by his community, like we all know, sallallahu alayhi wa. And it hurt the heart of the Prophet, absolutely, to go through emotion and feel pain and difficulty and challenges and feeling a sense of stress and anxiety over everything that is happening in the world is okay. It's not a bad thing, not a bad emotion. Even the Messenger, sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, in his greatness, he often felt that way. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reveals these verses of consolation to him. وَلَلْآخِرَةُ خَيْرٌ لَكَ مِنَ الْأُولَى. O Messenger of God, know that right now it's going to be very difficult for you. But know at the end of it all, it's going to be successful. So those first 10, 11 years in Mecca, when the Prophet ﷺ was preaching the message, and he was facing roadblock after roadblock and obstacle after obstacle, we see that eventually he was able to establish that government in the holy city of Medina that emanated all of the perfect qualities of beauty and justice and mercy and compassion and generosity. وَمَا أَرْسَلْنَاكَ إِلَّا رَحْمَةً لِلْعَالَمِينَ. There's another way as well of reading this particular verse of the Holy Quran. وَلَلْآخِرَةُ خَيْرٌ لَكَ مِنَ الْأُولَى. It means that when one puts forth an effort during the course of this world, then they know that they will reap a world that is far better than the world beyond this one. And in reality, it's sort of microcosmic of our own experiences, of our own challenges and obstacles during the course of life. For a student, for instance, going through those days whereby you have to read and you have to study and you have to write papers is not so much fun. It's incredibly challenging and incredibly stressful. Believe me, I know. I don't know why, but over the last couple of years, I decided that I was going to go into a doctoral program. And I'm a year and a half in, and I wondered, what the hell did I do to myself? When I'm sitting there writing those papers, and I'm attending class, and I'm taking exams, I realized that in the midst of this difficulty, and in the midst of this stress, and in the midst of this challenge, at the end of it all, is going to reap the benefit. وَلَلْآخِرَةُ خَيْرٌ لَكَ مِنَ الْأُولَى. That know, O messenger, know, O believer, that right now, in the early onset, things might be difficult. But at the end of it all, is going to be far better for you. So it goes back to us then asking that question. How exactly should we as individuals approach societal challenges that we are witness to on a day-to-day basis? And we learn exactly what our responsibilities are by the teachings of the Quran and that of the Messenger, Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wasallam, when they demonstrate to us that it's vital for us to have two important qualities. Firstly, positivity, and secondly, hopefulness, of course, as opposed to negativity and despair. And as difficult as it is sometimes, that hope, and we have ahadiths that point to this idea, that hope that we have within our hearts is a driving force that is truly transformational. That one individual who has hope in the midst of darkness can truly transform the entire room. And you go ahead and take a look at the example of the Prophet and of his family, alayhimus salam, during the course of their lives, and you consistently see that. And in reality, you see that it's part of our fitrah, or part of the human being's innate nature, to not jump to really negative conclusions, or to be in a state of despair about everything that is happening to us. Take a look at it. A few months ago, anyone who is intellectual, anyone who is logical, anyone who uses their mind, they realized that in the height of this pandemic that we're living in, we better wear a mask. And of course, people are going to be like, no, we don't need to wear a mask. I will not wear a mask. In fact, don't infringe on my rights. Do not tell me to wear a mask. But we are people who are believers. We are individuals who are intellectual. We are human beings who use our rationale. Thus, we are going to do everything that we can to bring safety to ourselves, to our family members, and to all of those around us by putting on a mask. Because our innate nature wants to push away any sort of harm, def al-darar. It's something very simple and something rational and something intellectual even, as this intellectual principle speaks to that is often studied within Islamic philosophy and law and so on and so forth, that we want safety in our life. We want good results and we want positive things to happen to us. It's normal, it's natural. So similarly, our lens by which we take a look at life has to transition out of the whole sky is falling upon us. I mean, to ask ourselves, how am I going to pick up those who have fallen? That's what we learn from the Messenger, and that's what we learn from Ahlul Bayt, alayhi salatu wasalam. So when it comes toward this conversation then, in regards to the end of times, our lens by which we look at things has to transition and it has to change. Out of the lens of despair and out of the lens of negativity into the lens of hopefulness and positivity. To take a look at life, glass half full as opposed to glass half empty. Because they consistently, the prophets, the messengers, the awliya, the Ahlul Bayt, alayhim salam, they consistently saw beauty in everything that they endured during the course of their lives. But what happened to the ummah of Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. That we live in the state of humility as opposed to pride, as opposed to courage, as opposed to bravery. We're always looking for the end of days without looking to see how I can make a difference in the world that is suffering, that is aching, that is ill, that is filled with pain and hardship. And this brings me then to the second dimension of my discussion. In regards to how exactly are we to read signs about the end of times, or signs that speak toward the return of the Mahdi, Ajjalallahu ta'ala farajah. Firstly, it's important to understand that many people, they get caught up in details as opposed to the essence. We talked about this quite a bit yesterday, that oftentimes we focus on the physical form, but we don't allow for ourselves to reflect upon the internal beauty of prayers, of fasting, of hajj, of rituals that we perform in honor of Imam Hussain, alayhi salatu wasalam, and we're neglecting the ultimate objective of it all. So there are books, and there are articles, and there are lectures that are dedicated to, for instance, how Imam al-Mahdi looks. He is going to be this tall. He's going to have this color hair. His eyes are going to be like this. He's going to have broad shoulders. His beard is going to be like this. At the same time, there are these characteristics that are given about how Dajjal looks. He's going to have one eye. He's going to be this tall. He's going to come out of this place of part of the world, so on and so forth. And people, they get so fixated upon what people are going to look like and what it is that they are going to say or do or wear or hold or so on and so forth, but they're neglecting the essence of it all. So oftentimes when we go ahead and read these narrations or hear them about the end of times, it's almost as if that we want everything to fall down from the sky so that the end of times come really, really quickly. What do I mean? This is a really serious problem within many of our communities. Let me just explain what I mean for just one moment. I was sitting with an individual, or was reached out to by an individual a couple of weeks ago, who told me that everything is really terrible in the world right now. I said, it's pretty bad, but it's been worse, and inshallah it will get better. And he said, no. He said that I'm praying that we have a second wave of coronavirus in New York City. I said, why would you ever ask or pray for something like that? May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala not respond to your dua in the same way that you made the silly supplication. He said, because I want everything to go really, really bad. I want everything to sort of fall so that the Imam al-Mahdi can soon come and remove this world of inequities and injustices. My first question to him was, why don't you go and rob the bank next to your house? First of all, you're going to make a couple of extra dollars, right? And then you would actually play a direct role in the return of the Imam alayhi salatu wasalam. Of course, I'm saying it sarcastically. I don't actually mean that you should go and rob the bank next to your house. Great. Now that we have concluded that, let me continue by saying that many individuals, they have this sort of approach toward understanding what all of these signs mean. Remember this, my dear sisters and brothers, and especially as a reminder to myself, that we have to control what we have to control, and we leave to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to control that which He has to control. So people, they go into the books of hadith, and they go and they find lectures, and they go and look out for things online, and they go and they start forwarding things on WhatsApp, or they receive this particular message from their aunt on WhatsApp, or they found it on social media that look at this child born with one eye. Poor kid, make dua for him, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala heals his other eye. Instead of saying that this poor child is Dajjal, what are we doing? What type of community have we become? We're a community of value, community of the Quran, community in which we walk in the footsteps of the Messenger of God, sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, and Ahlul Bayt, alayhi salatu wassalam. We are a community that has been taught to use our intellects and taught to use our rationale. We've been called Muslims, those who submit to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's an honor. We are from the ummah of the greatest of God's creations. Alhamdulillah alladhi جَعَلَنَا مِنْ أُمَّةِ مُحَمَّدٍ sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. All thanks and all praises due to God, who has made us from the community of Muhammad, and we're resorted to believing and submitting and allowing for our entire religion and ideology to be based upon the WhatsApp message that you received from your aunt on the other side of the world. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless all of our aunts, inshallah. So what I'm trying to say is that it's super important to understand that we have certain responsibilities and that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will take care of his. So how is it then that we are to deal with all of these narrations that talk about X and Y and Z happening or taking place prior to the end of times? Firstly, we need to make sure that we're verifying the authenticity of these ahadith and of these traditions. Many of them, they came out of a particular climate, socio-politically within the early Muslim community or soon thereafter, and entered into the books of ahadith of the Prophet and his family, alayhi salatu wasalam. This is important to verify the authenticity of these narrations. Secondly, we need to be a people who read them contextually. Sometimes when you read a hadith and it says that X and Y and Z is going to happen, and that same exact thing happened yesterday, all of a sudden you think that, oh my goodness, this hadith is speaking about what just happened in the news yesterday. The world is going to end tomorrow. Take a deep breath and understand that maybe that particular event happened numerous times. For instance, there are these hadiths that tell us that at the end of times or prior to the return of the Mahdi, ajjalallahu ta'ala faraja, that Baghdad is going to burn. How many times has Baghdad and Iraq undergone violence and trial and tribulation? Numerous times in our own lifetimes. In my lifetime of 33 years, how many times has that city and that country gone through hardship and gone through war and gone through fire? Numerous times. And probably numerous times before my day. And God forbid we make dua that it never happens again. But nonetheless, oftentimes we want to jump into the conclusion that, wait, look, it just happened yesterday. Certainly the world is going to end tomorrow. So we need to, after verifying the authenticity of these narrations and reading them contextually, we also need to make sure that we're not jumping to conclusions based on our emotion. And understand that your emotion, when it comes toward dealing with signs or predictions about the end of times, is not going to take you anywhere. You have a responsibility to be the best of the servants and the best of the slaves of God, fulfilling your responsibilities to Him, to yourself, to your family, to your workplace, to your job, whether the world ends tomorrow or whether the world ends in the next 24 hours. What difference does it make? At the end of the day, we are individuals who have responsibilities to our Creator, and we cannot negotiate them at all or ever. So that brings me then toward a couple of important questions, or a couple of important questions that many people ask. When we take a look at all of these signs that come in regards to the end of times or in regards to the return of Imam al-Mahdi, ajjalallahu ta'ala faraja, it's important to understand that there are certain signs that are absolutely going to happen, or what are known as mahtum, meaning that we have authentic narrations from Ahlul Bayt, alayhim salatu wasalam, from the Messenger of God, sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, which states that these are absolutely going to happen. Everything else that you might find in the books of literature, that you might find in the books of traditions, are not necessarily verified other than these 3 or 4 or 5. What are these 5? The first one, according to ahadith of Ahlul Bayt, alayhi salatu wasalam, is the rise of someone who is known as the Yamani. Someone who will come from Yemen, who will call and support the Imam al-Mahdi, ajjalallahu ta'ala faraja. What do we know about him? How tall is he? What color clothes is he going to wear? What color eye is he going to have? Is he going to have an iPhone or an Android? I don't know. What we absolutely know about him is he's someone who comes from Yemen. Does that mean he literally comes from Yemen, meaning he will make his call from Yemen? I don't know. What we do know is that ancestrally or ethnically, he comes from Yemen, and his responsibility is to call people toward the Mahdi. The second sign that we have within our ahadith, which are what are known as mahtum, meaning absolutely undeniable and certain to happen, is the rise of the Sufyani. someone who will call in opposition to the Imam. Someone who will call in opposition to the Imam, desiring to create commotion, bloodshed, oppression, injustices, so on and so forth. The third one of these is a call made in the sky by Jibreel. That a call will be made from the heavens that everyone will hear. What does this mean? What are the details of it? Again, we leave that to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The fourth is the killing of Nafsul Zaki, or someone who is given this title, a pure soul. A man who is a follower of the Imam, of Al-Mahdi, and who preaches in Mecca, meaning he will make the call from Mecca, and he will be killed between Rukn al-Yamani and Maqam Ibrahim in front of the Holy Kaaba. Oftentimes, whenever we hear about anyone who is killed in Hijaz, killed in the country that you all know that I'm talking about, Hijaz, where Mecca and Medina reside, the first conclusion is that, look, that person has to have been Nafs al-Zaki. That has to have been the pure soul, and certainly Imam Mahdi is coming tomorrow. No, we don't know. We leave it up to the ahadith of Ahlul Bayt, who tell us that there's going to be a pure soul who is killed between Bayn al-Rukni wal-Maqam, between Rukn al-Yamani and Maqam Ibrahim. This is number 4. And the fifth is that the earth will swallow by means of some sort of natural disaster, Sufyani and his followers in a place called Bayda, a place between Mecca and Medina, when they were trying to wage a war against Imam al-Mahdi. So these are 5 signs that we have within our ahadith. Number 1, the rise of the Yamani. Secondly, the rise of the Sufyani. Thirdly, a call made from the sky. Fourthly, the killing of the pure soul next to the Holy Kaaba. And fifthly, the earth swallowing Sufyani, meaning the enemy of justice. And these ahadith are clear that these instances or these particular events will happen prior to the return of the Mahdi, and certainly well before then, the end of times. Anything else that we have within our traditions, we don't know whether it's going to happen. They might be signs that are pointing us into the direction to get prepared, fix your heart, fix your soul, start praying, start doing the good things that you need to be doing during the course of your life. But at the end of the day, what we have within our ahadith are these 5 signs, and we do not control them. We do not facilitate them. These are in the hands of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is number 1. Question number 1 that many people ask, what are these signs? These are the 5. A second sort of frequently asked question in regards to how we read narrations about the end of times and the return of the Mahdi is in regards to whether or not there is a specific time that's been stipulated about Imam al-Mahdi's return. We have general descriptions within our ahadith literature. For instance, that Imam al-Mahdi will return on a Friday, and then he will return near the Kaaba, and he will return in an odd year, for instance. Meaning, for instance, he won't return in 2020, but he'll return in 2021. But of course, if we're taking a look at the Hijri calendar, then we can take a look and see, is it the odd year, the even year, so on and so forth. This is what we have within our traditions. Then he'll return on a Friday, he'll return near the Kaaba, and he'll return in an odd year. All of a sudden, everyone, they believe that every Friday in an odd year, that Imam Mahdi is going to return. You get what I'm trying to say? Is that, again, we jump to conclusions based on certain things, but when you go toward the ahadith of the Prophet and his family, alayhim salatu wasalam, they have said numerous times, كَذَبَ الْوَقَاتُ, that liars are those who stipulate a time for the Mahdi and stipulate a time for the end of times. We are not a community and a culture, in other words, from the teachings of the Messenger of God sallallahu alaihi wasallam and Ahlul Bayt alayhim salatu wasalam, that says to even worry or focus about these things. Because again, we have responsibilities, which we're going to get to in just a moment. But at the end of the day, when an individual asks this very frequently asked question, is there a specific time that's been stipulated? No, there's not been a specific time. We don't have a day, we don't have a year. If we had that, then things would be a lot easier. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the wisdom of his messenger Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam do not want us to live our lives thinking about or reflecting upon every single bad thing that happens and believe that it's the end of days. Because again, we have certain things that we need to take care of for our own selves. And thirdly, and finally, a question that is often raised by believers, by Muslims in regards to this particular notion, is in regards to whether or not we will actually be aware that the Imam has returned, or will it be a time that's really, really confusing? Meaning that during the course of those days, will we know what's happening, or will we be completely oblivion to everything that is occurring around us? Will I truly be able to find the Mahdi and be at his support, or not? Will I be so far away and distant from him that I won't have that ability? First of all, we have hadiths that state that when the Mahdi returns, that he will be speaking from the east, and the people in the west will be able to hear him. And when he speaks in the west, the people in the east can hear him. Maybe 100 years ago, 50 years ago, people in different parts of the world could have never imagined what this means. Now today, we know exactly what that might mean. We don't want to say for sure, but it certainly might mean that technology has developed to the state where every single one of us can log on to Imam Mahdi's YouTube channel, for instance. Or then he'll be Instagram living his inauguration address, for instance. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us that opportunity during the course of our lifetimes, inshallah ta'ala. So when we go toward this idea, and we take a look at this narration that says that everyone will hear the Imam, and another narration in which one of the companions comes to Imam as-Sadiq alayhi salam and he states, "O grandson of the Messenger of God, tell me, at the end of days, when the Imam of from your progeny, the 12th from your progeny, makes his return, what's going to happen? Will we be able to know who he is, what he is?" To which Imam as-Sadiq alayhi salam says, "Look up at the sun," looks up at the sky, and he states, "Inna amruna abyan min ash-shams," that surely our affair, our imamate, the Mahdi, is going to be clearer to the believers than the sun. Meaning it's going to be apparent. Don't worry about that. At the end of the day, there are certain things that we need to be worrying about. And that brings me then toward the third dimension of my discussion for this evening. In regards to then, what are these responsibilities that we have in regards to the predictions around us about the Mahdi, about the end of times, and about everything that is happening in the world today? First of all, we go to a hadith from the Messenger of God sallallahu alaihi wasallam, in which he states, "Afdalul ibadah intidarul faraj," that the best act of worship is to await the relief, is to await the victory. And numerous ahadith of Ahlul Bayt alayhim salatu wasalam, they speak to us and tell us that that victory ultimately is with the Imam of our time, al-Mahdi min Ali Muhammad, ajjallahu ta'ala farajah. And then we need to think and understand that what does it mean to await the relief? This awaiting does not mean an awaiting whereby we are passive, but rather it's an awaiting that is active. In the words of some of our scholars, they state, amal ma'al amal. In the Arabic language, the word amal means hope, and the word amal means action with the ayn. So it means hope in his return and the ability for us to facilitate and support a system of equity and justice that eradicates the poverty and the racism and the injustices that we're seeing all across the world, but at the same time with action. Hope in addition to action. And then furthermore, remembering again that you and I, we don't have control over the signs in and of itself. We can't facilitate either the Imam's return being very soon or being postponed. At the end of the day, the only thing that we can control are our own deeds, are our own actions. Because I can recite Dua al-Nudba every Friday morning, and recite Dua al-Ahad every day after my Fajr prayers. And I could supplicate to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, say, "Oh Allah, bring us relief with the return of Al-Mahdi alayhi salatu wasalam. But at the end of the day, if I can't be someone who establishes justice in my own home, if I can't be someone who establishes justice in my own workplace, if I can't be someone who teaches good etiquette to my family and to my children and to those around me, and I can't live that life that the Imam alayhi salam desires from me, then what is all of this for in the first place? Who is better, the one who recites dua, nutba every Friday morning, asking God to hasten the reappearance of the Imam, and then abuses his wife and his children, and treats others poorly at work or at school? Or someone who is consistently striving toward creating a system of unity and brotherhood, sisterhood, and love, and mercy, and equity within his own community? Something for us to think about. And it's so also important, again then, for us to understand our primary responsibility. In a hadith from Imam Sadiq alayhi salatu wasalam narrated in Kitab al-Ghaiba of al-Nu'mani, he states, "Man sarrahu an yakun min ashab al-qa'im falyantadir." That if someone desires to be from amongst the companions of the Mahdi, falyantadir, then let him wait. وَلْيَعْمَلْ بِالْوَرَعِ وَمَحَاسِنِ الْأَخْلَاقِ وَهُوَ مُنْتَظِرٌ. And that he or she should work and perform actions with piety and with the best of etiquette. And that is the one who is truly someone who waits. Meaning again, it's a hope that also comes with action. In that famous dua that many of us we recite during the holy month of Ramadan, as narrated by the Messenger of God sallallahu alaihi wasallam, to be recited every day after every prayer during the holy month of Ramadan, we state, Allahumma adkhil ala ahli al-qubur as-surur, Allahumma aghni kulla faqir, Allahumma ashbi' kulla jar', Allahumma qsu kulla uryan, Allahumma kfi dayna kulla madin ila akhirih, until the end of the dua. We say, oh Allah, for those in the graves, make them happy. For those who don't have food, feed them. For those who are naked, clothe them. For those who don't have wealth, make them wealthy out of your wealth. For those who have debts that need to be paid, oh Allah, you facilitate for that. When someone reads this dua, and when they read this supplication, it's not such that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is all of a sudden going to allow for the best of burgers and sushi to fall upon the house of those individuals who don't have food. You're not going to find all of a sudden those who don't have any wealth briefcases of $100 bills in front of their homes or in front of their apartment buildings. It's a dua by which we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to also give us the inspiration and the motivation to go out and make that difference. So when I say, Allahumma qsu kulla uryan, Allahumma shfi kulla marid, Allahumma kfi dayna kulla madin, oh Allah, for those who don't have clothes, give me the inspiration and the ability and the support so that I can go and clothe them. Oh Allah, for those who are hungry, give me the ability and the blessing that I go and I feed them. This is what we learn from Ahlul Bayt, that it's not about living a life whereby you're depressed all the time due to everything that is happening, but rather we are looking to be amongst those who are difference makers, who are agents for change, who are shining that light in the midst of darkness. And that's what it means to being someone who is at the support of Imam al-Mahdi, Ajjalallahu ta'ala farajah. And when we take a look at the qualities then of Imam Hussain alayhi salatu wasalam, and the qualities of the companions of Imam Hussain alayhi salatu wasalam, What made them stand out and be so unique on the 10th of Muharram is again that they were individuals who had those values that Imam Hussain والسلام, lived. To be or to call oneself a Hussaini truly means to emanate his actions and his deeds at every juncture and at every opportunity that we get. Which is why you see within a narration, Imam Zain al-Abidin alayhi salam, he narrates that when I was burying my father Abu Abdullah al-Hussain alayhi salatu wasalam, I saw different marks on his body. Amongst the marks on the blessed body of Imam al-Hussain alayhi salam were of course the marks of the spears and the swords and the arrows that struck him on the day of Ashura. But in addition to that was the marks of the bruises on the back of Hussain alayhi salam from the food that he would carry in the darkness of the night of Medina and distribute to the orphans and the widows during the course of those years. Because in addition to his bravery and his courage and his valor in battle and his chivalry, Imam al-Hussain alayhi salatu wasalam strove towards supporting again those who were the most vulnerable. In the same way as his grandfather, the Messenger of God, and his father, Amir al-Mu'mineen, Ali alayhi salam. The 2nd of Muharram is the day in which we recollect when Imam al-Hussain alayhi salam arrives in the holy city of Karbala. We'll talk about that tomorrow. Before that, inshallah, let me just tell you a little bit about how the Imam alayhi salam got to Karbala. Before he reaches the holy city of Karbala, of course, we know that he resides in the holy city of Medina. And before leaving to go and perform the Hajj pilgrimage that particular year, 60 after Hijrah, he realized that this might be the last days and the last moments that he has in the company of his grandfather, the Messenger of God, sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. The last time that he was going to walk in the streets of Medina. My dear sisters and brothers, for those of you who have been for Hajj, who have been for Umrah, you know that there's this incredible magnetic attraction and pull about the holy city of Medina. You're in the company of the Messenger of God, sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. And it's an incredible feeling. And that once you leave Medina, you always yearn to smell its fragrance, to be in the company of the Prophet, to be in company of al-Zahran, the Imams of al-Baqi, peace and blessings be upon him. I want you to imagine Hussain alayhi salam, who is the son of Medina. He is the king of Medina. He is the son of the Messenger of God, sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sallam. And he realizes that Banu Umayyah now begins to conspire. And he decides to leave Medina after the death of Muawiyah. When he hears the news in the middle of the month of Rajab, the governor of Medina calls Imam al-Hussain alayhi salam and says, "Oh, Abu Abdullah, you have one of two choices. Either you can pledge allegiance to Yazid, who has overtaken the caliphate from his father Muawiyah, or we cut off your head." To which Imam al-Hussain alayhi salatu wasalam, in that very famous episode, he looks at these individuals and he states, "Mithli la yubayi'u mithlah." A man like me will never pledge allegiance to a man like him. A man with values like Abu Abdullah al-Hussain will never pledge allegiance to a man like Yazid ibn Muawiyah. And it is said that at that moment, Imam al-Hussain alayhi salatu wasalam leaves. And he goes to his sister Zainab alayhi salam. He says, "Oh, my sister Zainab, it's time. Now it's time for those days and for those nights which we have been foretold. It's time that we leave the city of Medina." But before he leaves, he says, "Let me go and send my last salutations upon my grandfather, the Messenger of God, and upon my mother, Fatima al-Zahra alayhi salam." So Imam al-Hussain alayhi salam, he goes to the mosque of the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. And he sends his last ziyarah upon the Prophet of God sallallahu alayhi wa knowing that these are days leading up to his ultimate martyrdom. He prays 2 rakat prayers, and then he goes to the grave of the Prophet of God, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And the narration states that he puts his hand on the grave of the Messenger of God and he calls out, Ya Jaddah, Ya Rasulullah, Inni ana al-Hussain. That, oh my grandfather, know that I am here with you and I am your son. And at that moment it is said that Imam Hussain alayhi salam falls unconscious out of grief. And in a dream he sees that the Prophet of God sallallahu alaihi wasallam comes to him, and Imam Hussain alayhi salam says, oh my grandfather Rasulullah, please take me to you. To which the Messenger of God says, oh Aba Abdullah, that no, don't worry, soon you will return back to me. But you have to reach a station and you have to reach a status in order to enter into my proximity that can only be attained by martyrdom. So get up and go and perform your deed and perform your task. It is said that he sends those last salutations upon his grandfather, the Messenger of God, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, perhaps remembering the moments that he had to endure, those moments of enjoyment, those moments of beauty, those moments of love in the company of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And then he goes toward the graveyard of Baqi, or toward the grave of his mother, Zahra alayhi salam. And one of the poets narrates that when Imam al-Hussain alayhi salam went to the grave of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam to send his last salutation, he went with courage and he went with a sense of charisma to him. But when he looked toward the grave of Fatima al-Zahra alayhi salam, he humbled himself, remembering and recollecting her tragedy, remembering everything that his mother had to endure. And he went and sent his last salutations upon his mother al-Zahra and upon his brother Imam al-Hasan alayhi salatu wassalam. And then he directed himself toward Karbala. My dear sisters and brothers, we are walking closer and closer into those days of immense tragedy, which we recollect that which transpired to our master Abi Abdullah al-Hussain alayhi salatu wassalam. Keep in mind everything that the Imam left behind when he was in Medina. Then I want you to go ahead and remember that which Zainab alayhi salam returned back to Medina without Hussein, without Abbas, without Ali al-Akbar, even without the 6-month-old infants. Inna lillah wa inna ilayhi raji'un wa ala alamatillah lil qawm al-zalimin. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to grant us the ability to see wisdom with everything that we have to endure and that surrounds us by midst of challenges. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to instill within our hearts the love and the legacy of Muhammad wa ali Muhammad, and to grant us a life that resembles the life of Muhammad wa ali Muhammad, and to grant us a death that resembles the death of Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to grant us tawfiq and success during the course of these next several programs, and to instill in our hearts the love of Hussein and his grandfather Muhammad, and his father Ali, and his mother Fatima, and his brother Hassan, and the 9 Imams that come from his progeny. Walhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen, wa sallallahu ala Sayyidina wa Nabiyyina Muhammad, wa ala Ahl Bayt al-Tayyibin.